Miscommunication fuels stress, frustration, and distance. But mindful communication, it heals, it strengthens, it unites. So how do you practice this? First, speak with intention. Before saying something, ask yourself, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Second, listen with presence. When someone speaks, don't just hear their words. Understand their emotions, their meaning. Listen without planning your response. Third, embrace the power of silence. Not every thought needs to be spoken. Not every moment needs to be filled with noise. A well-built bridge stands for years, allowing people to cross safely. But a poorly built one collapses, cutting off connection. Your words are the same. Every time you speak, you are building a bridge, either toward understanding or away from it. Now ask yourself, when was the last time you truly listened without planning your response? The quality of your communication determines the quality of your relationships. Build your bridges wisely. There comes a moment in life when you realize that your greatest source of suffering has never been what others have said or done to you. It has been your reaction to it. It is not the insult that wounds you, but the meaning you give it. It is not the betrayal that breaks you, but your refusal to let go. It is not the failure that defines you, but your decision to carry it as a burden instead of a lesson. Most people live their entire lives as prisoners of their own minds, shackled by the weight of things they were never meant to carry. They replay old conversations, hold on to grudges, explain themselves over and over to people who have already chosen not to understand. And in doing so, they become trapped in a never-ending cycle of suffering that is entirely of their own making. But what if you stopped? What if you decided right now that you would no longer allow the opinions of others to hold power over you? What if you stopped explaining yourself, stopped defending yourself, stopped wasting your energy on battles that do not serve you? What if, instead of reacting, you simply let go? Imagine a man walking through a marketplace carrying a heavy sack of stones. Every time someone insults him, he picks up another stone. Every time he feels misunderstood, another stone. Every time he argues to prove himself, another stone. Eventually, the sack becomes so heavy that he can barely walk. And yet, when asked why he carries such a burden, he says, "Because they gave these stones to me." But here's the truth. Just because someone offers you something does not mean you have to accept it. Just because someone throws negativity at you does not mean you must carry it. You have a choice. You always have. This is why the strongest minds do not react. They do not explain. They do not justify. They do not waste time arguing with those who do not wish to understand. They understand that their energy is sacred, and they refuse to give it away so easily. There is an ancient Zen story about a warrior who was constantly insulted by his enemies. They mocked him, belittled him, did everything they could to provoke a reaction. But no matter what they said, the warrior remained silent. One day, a student asked him, "Why do you never respond?" The warrior smiled and said, "If someone offers you poison and you do not drink it, who does it harm?" The lesson is clear. What you do not accept cannot touch you. What you do not react to has no power over you. What you choose to walk away from loses its grip on your soul. But the moment you stop reacting, the world will test you. It will push harder, trying to pull you back into old habits. It will whisper, "You must explain yourself. You must fight. You must prove them wrong." Do not listen. That is the voice of the ego, desperate to keep you bound. The truth is, those who seek to misunderstand you will do so no matter how much you explain. And those who truly see you, they do not need an explanation. Think of the ocean. When a stone is thrown into it, does it protest? Does it seek revenge? Number. It simply absorbs the disturbance, allowing the ripples to fade until the water is calm once more. You must be like the ocean. Let them misunderstand you. Let them judge you. Let them create their own stories about you. None of it matters. What matters is that you remain unmoved, unshaken, untouched by the noise of the world. Because the moment you stop explaining yourself, the moment you stop carrying burdens that are not yours, you will experience something most never do: peace. And in that peace, you will finally understand the greatest truth of all. You were never meant to beg for understanding. You were meant to become so undeniable that no explanation is needed. There is a silent war being waged every day, though most never see it. It is not fought with weapons, not waged on battlefields, and yet it has stolen more lives than any external enemy ever could. This is the war of self-doubt, the quiet erosion of confidence, the subtle manipulation of the mind that convinces you to explain, to justify, to prove yourself to a world that was never listening in the first place. Most people do not even realize they are soldiers in this battle. They wake up each morning and step into the world already armed with defenses, already anticipating judgment, already preparing themselves for the need to explain why they are the way they are. They carry invisible wounds, moments from the past where they were misunderstood, where they were ridiculed, where they felt unseen, and these wounds shape how they move, how they speak, how they shrink themselves to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold them. But at what cost? What do you gain from explaining yourself? What do you achieve by seeking validation from those who refuse to see you? Has there ever been a time when your justification truly changed someone's perception of you? Or have you simply exhausted yourself, drained your energy, and found yourself trapped in a cycle where no answer is ever enough? There is a great misconception that clarity comes from being understood. That if only you could explain yourself better, if only you could find the right words, if only you could articulate your truth perfectly, people would finally see you as you are. But that is an illusion. Those who are meant to understand you will do so without explanation, and those who do not wish to see you will never hear you, no matter how many words you spill. So why waste your breath? Imagine a great mountain standing against the sky. It does not explain why it rises, why it stretches upward, why it exists as it does. It does not seek approval from the valley below. And yet it is admired, not because it argues for its place, but because it simply is. You too must be like the mountain. But here is where the struggle begins. The moment you stop explaining yourself, the moment you refuse to justify your decisions, the world will react. People will question you. They will push back, demand answers, expect you to shrink. They will mistake your silence for weakness, your stillness for arrogance, your refusal to engage as proof that you are in the wrong. Let them. Their assumptions are not your concern. Their expectations are not your burden. The world will always try to control those who do not conform, who do not bow, who do not seek permission. But the moment you stop explaining yourself, you step outside their control. You become something they cannot manipulate, cannot guilt, cannot bring back into the old patterns they are comfortable with. And that is terrifying for them, because most people build their lives around external validation. Their choices, their beliefs, even their emotions are dictated by the opinions of others. They are not free. They are caged by the need to be understood. And when they see someone who does not seek that same approval, someone who moves through life with an unshakable presence, they feel threatened. Not because you have done anything to them, but because your existence forces them to confront their own chains. But that is not your problem to solve. There is a reason the great sages, the mystics, the enlightened ones spoke little. It was not because they had nothing to say, but because they understood that true power is found in presence, not in explanation. The warrior who must constantly prove their strength is not strong. The leader who must argue for their wisdom is not wise. The soul that must explain itself to be accepted is not yet free. You must decide, do you wish to be heard or do you wish to be free? Because those are not the same thing. Being heard means constantly engaging, constantly defending, constantly seeking to prove yourself in a world that is too distracted to truly listen. But being free, that means knowing that your truth does not require an audience, that your worth is not tied to how many people understand you, that your purpose does not need to be approved before it is lived. The strongest minds in history were not those who sought to explain themselves, but those who became undeniable. A fire does not justify why it burns. It simply burns. A river does not apologize for carving its path. It simply flows. The sun does not wait for permission to rise. It simply rises. And you? You were never meant to beg for understanding. You were meant to exist so fully, so completely, so unapologetically that no explanation is required. But the world will not understand this at first. The moment you stop explaining, people will react. They will test you, push you, try to pull you back into the cycle of justification. They will say you have changed. They will call you distant. They will try to make you feel guilty for not engaging as you once did. Smile, breathe, keep walking. Because those who truly see you, those who truly respect you, those who are meant to be in your life will not need explanations. They will not demand justifications. They will simply recognize you for who you are. And those who do not, they were never meant to walk with you in the first place. So let go of the need to explain. Release the weight of justification. Step into the power of silence, of presence, of being so absolutely certain in who you are that no argument, no criticism, no misunderstanding can shake you. Because the truth is, you do not need to be understood. You need to be. And once you realize that, once you truly embrace that, you will never again waste another moment trying to prove yourself to anyone. You will simply live. And that is all the explanation the world will ever need. There comes a time in life when you realize that the explanations you once gave so freely were never truly for you. They were for others, for their comfort, for their understanding, for their approval. But what did they ever give you in return? Did their understanding set you free? Did their approval bring you peace? Or did it only bind you tighter to expectations that were never yours to carry? You must ask yourself, why have I spent so much time justifying my existence to those who were never meant to walk my path? The moment you ask this question, you begin to see the illusion for what it is. You begin to see that you have been standing in an invisible prison, one built not of walls and chains, but of expectations and the relentless desire to be seen in a way that fits neatly into the minds of others. But tell me this, why should your soul, vast and untamed, be confined to the smallness of their understanding? The strongest people in history were never understood at first. The visionaries, the leaders, the enlightened minds, they all walked alone before the world caught up. They did not pause their journey to explain their every step. They did not beg to be accepted before moving forward. They walked in silence, knowing that those who were meant to see them would see them without a single word. And yet here you are, still explaining, still waiting, still hoping that if you say the right thing, in the right way, to the right people, they will finally understand. But they won't. Not because you are wrong, not because you are unworthy, but because they were never meant to understand you in the first place. Some people will never see you, no matter how clearly you present yourself. And some will recognize you in an instant, without you having to say a word. Do you know why? Because understanding does not come from explanation. It comes from alignment. It comes from resonance. It comes from meeting the right people at the right time. But what most people do not realize is that the more you explain, the further you drift from yourself. Every justification is a compromise, a bending of your truth to fit into a shape that was never meant to hold you. And the more you bend, the more you break. The more you seek to be understood, the more you lose the essence of what made you unique in the first place. And when you lose that, you become just another voice in the crowd, another soul weighed down by the endless burden of proving, explaining, convincing. But tell me, who told you that you needed to be understood to be whole? Who convinced you that your worth was dependent on how well others could comprehend your journey? Because the truth is, you were never meant to explain yourself. You were meant to become so undeniable that no explanation is needed. Imagine a mountain standing tall against the sky. It does not lower itself for those who cannot climb. It does not bend to be more accessible. It does not explain why it is high, why it is vast, why it exists. It simply stands. And those who are meant to reach its peak will climb, not because the mountain has made itself easier to understand, but because they are ready to see it for what it is. You must become like that mountain. You must rise, not because you seek to be seen, but because it is in your nature to rise. And if some cannot grasp the height of who you are becoming, that is not your burden to carry. But be prepared. When you stop explaining yourself, the world will resist. People will accuse you of arrogance. They will call you distant. They will demand that you shrink, that you explain, that you return to the version of yourself they once understood. And in that moment, you will have a choice. Will you step back into the comfort of being explainable? Will you shrink yourself to fit their expectations? Or will you rise silent and unshaken, knowing that your truth does not require validation? Most people will choose the first option. They will return to what is familiar. They will continue explaining, convincing, proving, and in doing so, they will continue living in a prison of their own making. But the rare few who understand the power of their own presence, they will choose differently. They will walk forward, unbothered by misunderstanding, untethered by the opinions of those who were never meant to see them clearly. They will embody a truth so deep, so unshakable, that words become unnecessary. And that is the difference between those who live bound and those who live free. The bound seek to be understood. The free seek only to be. And once you cross that threshold, once you step into the life that no longer requires explanation, you will understand something most never do. You were never behind, never broken, never in need of validation. You were always whole. You simply needed to stop seeking permission to realize it. So let them misunderstand. Let them question. Let them demand explanations that you will no longer give. It is not your burden to make them see. Your only responsibility is to rise. And in doing so, you will finally understand the truth that has been waiting for you all along. You were never meant to explain yourself. You were meant to become so undeniable that no explanation is needed. There is a profound strength in solitude, a hidden power that many overlook. The world constantly tells us that to be alone is to be incomplete, that silence is something to be feared, that a life without constant noise and company is one of emptiness. But what if the opposite were true? What if, in the quiet, we could find something far greater than mere companionship, ourselves? Imagine stepping into a vast, empty room. At first, the silence is overwhelming, almost deafening. The absence of voices, the lack of distraction, it all feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable. But as you stand there, something shifts. The silence is no longer empty. It is full of possibility, full of discovery, full of the parts of yourself that have been drowned out by the noise of the world. This is the journey of solitude, not a path of loneliness, but one of self-discovery, of empowerment, of growth. And at the heart of this journey lies a wisdom that has stood the test of time, the teachings of the Buddha, a prince who walked away from a life of luxury to find something far greater. He discovered the profound peace that comes from within, a peace that is not dependent on others, but on one's own understanding of the self. In a world where solitude is often misunderstood, where being alone is seen as a weakness rather than a strength, we must shift our perspective. Because true solitude is not isolation, it is the space in which we finally hear the voice of our own soul. The first step in embracing this path is to welcome the quiet. At first, the absence of distraction may seem unsettling. You might feel the urge to fill every moment, to escape the silence with entertainment, with people, with anything that keeps you from truly sitting with yourself. But this discomfort is not a sign that you are on the wrong path. It is a sign that you are finally beginning to listen. Buddha taught that balance is the key to all things. Not too much of one thing, nor too little. And solitude is no different. It is not about shutting the world out completely, nor is it about desperately seeking company. It is about finding peace in being with yourself, learning to enjoy your own presence, and understanding that the relationship you have with yourself is the foundation of everything else in your life. So how do we begin? How do we turn solitude into something sacred rather than something to be avoided? It starts with intention. Just as a sculptor does not fear the empty block of stone, but instead sees the masterpiece waiting to be carved within it, we must learn to see solitude not as an absence, but as an opportunity. In the quiet, we can begin to hear our own thoughts more clearly. We learn to separate what is truly ours from what has been imposed upon us by the outside world. We uncover our deepest desires, our forgotten dreams, our true selves beneath the layers of expectation and distraction. And in this space, we become our own best friend. No longer afraid of being alone, but embracing it as a time to nurture ourselves, to grow, to heal. We learn to rely on ourselves to take care of not just our physical needs, but our emotional and spiritual ones as well. Buddha often spoke of mindfulness, of being present in each moment, fully aware of ourselves and the world around us. Solitude offers us the perfect opportunity to practice this, to truly live in the present without the distractions that constantly pull us away from ourselves. With time, we begin to find joy in the simple moments, the stillness of the morning, the peace of an undisturbed thought, the clarity that comes from uninterrupted reflection. What once felt like emptiness becomes fullness. What once felt like loneliness becomes freedom. This is not a journey of escaping the world, but of preparing to re-enter it with a deeper understanding of oneself. Because when you learn to be happy alone, when you find peace within yourself, you no longer seek it from outside sources, you become whole, and from that wholeness, you bring something far greater into the world. So embrace the quiet. Step into the solitude, not with fear, but with curiosity, because within it, you will find not only yourself, but the kind of strength that no storm, no loss, no external force can ever take away. There is a quiet power in solitude, a hidden force waiting to be discovered by those who dare to embrace it. It is not loneliness, it is not emptiness. It is an invitation, an adventure into the depths of self-discovery, into a world where you become your own best companion, your own guide, your own source of fulfillment. Most people fear being alone. They fill their days with noise, their minds with distractions, their hearts with attachments that prevent them from ever truly knowing themselves. But what if solitude was not something to escape, but something to explore? Imagine waking up one day with no obligations to anyone but yourself. No expectations to meet, no roles to play, just you, your thoughts, and the world as it is. At first, the silence might feel heavy, unfamiliar, even intimidating. But if you listen closely, within that silence lies a truth that has been whispered through centuries, carried in the teachings of wise sages, hidden within the stillness of monks who have walked the path before us. You are complete as you are, but we are not taught this. We are told that fulfillment comes from others, that our happiness depends on relationships, that our worth is measured by how well we fit into society's mold. And so, when we find ourselves alone, we panic. We assume something is missing. We assume something is wrong. We assume we are incomplete. But solitude is not a void. It is an opportunity. It is the blank canvas upon which we paint the masterpiece of our truest self. And those who embrace it, those who lean into the quiet rather than running from it, discover something that others never will. Freedom. Think of the Buddha, who walked away from a life of luxury, not to escape the world, but to understand it. In his solitude, he found wisdom. In his silence, he found clarity. In his stillness, he found a truth that remains unchanged to this day. The world does not complete you, you complete yourself. But how do we begin this journey? How do we transform solitude from something we fear into something we cherish? The first step is to redefine what it means to be alone. It is not isolation. It is not punishment. It is the greatest gift you can give yourself. The chance to listen to your own voice without interruption, to wake up without needing to check your phone, without needing to be validated by someone else's presence, without needing to explain yourself to the world, to simply be. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. The mind, unaccustomed to stillness, will try to fill the space with distractions. But if you sit with it, if you allow yourself to be present with your own company, something shifts. You begin to hear the thoughts beneath the noise. You begin to understand your own patterns, your own desires, your own fears. And in that understanding, you reclaim control. Imagine a river flowing freely, carving its own path through the earth. It does not ask for permission. It does not explain its direction. It simply moves, adapting, shifting, creating something beautiful along the way. This is the way of those who embrace solitude. They do not seek validation. They do not fear being misunderstood. They allow themselves to flow naturally, unburdened by the expectations of others. But solitude is not just about being alone. It is about what you do with that time. Some fill it with distractions, numbing themselves to the discomfort of their own presence. But the wise use it to cultivate something deeper: self-awareness, self-mastery, self-love. They meditate, they reflect, they create, they grow. They understand that every moment spent alone is a moment spent strengthening the foundation of who they are. The world will try to pull you away from this. It will tell you that solitude is unnatural, that happiness is found in constant interaction, that you must always be surrounded by others to feel fulfilled. But those who have tasted true solitude, those who have found joy in their own company, know the truth. There is nothing more powerful than a mind at peace with itself. This is the beginning of the journey, the first step into a world where you no longer need to run from silence, where you no longer fear being alone, where you begin to see solitude not as an absence, but as a presence, an invitation to step into the fullest version of yourself. And once you embrace this, once you no longer need the world to complete you, you will discover something extraordinary. You were never alone to begin with. There comes a point in life when you realize that most people do not actually listen to understand. They listen to respond, to argue, to impose their own perceptions upon you. And the more you explain, the more they twist your words, shaping them into whatever fits their narrative. It is a cycle that never ends, a battle that drains your spirit, an exhausting attempt to be seen by those who have already decided who you are. But the moment you understand this, you awaken to something far more powerful, the ability to walk away from the need to be understood, the ability to exist fully and unapologetically, without bending, without shrinking, without justifying. Most people never reach this place. They remain trapped in a life dictated by external approval, tethered to the need for validation, explaining themselves at every turn. They do not see that in doing so, they give away the most precious thing they have, their power. Every time you explain yourself to someone who is determined not to understand, you are feeding them energy that could have been used to build, to grow, to move forward. You are pouring yourself into a cup that will never be full. And the irony? The moment you stop explaining, the moment you stop chasing understanding, those who once dismissed you will begin to take notice. Because nothing commands more respect than a person who does not seek it. Imagine walking through a vast desert, the sun beating down, the weight of everything you have carried pressing against your shoulders. And then in the distance, you see a tree, strong, unmoved, thriving in the midst of the harshest conditions. It does not ask the sun for permission to grow. It does not beg the wind to be gentle. It does not explain itself to the shifting sands. It simply exists, deeply rooted, unwavering in its presence. You must become like that tree. Let the storms rage. Let the winds howl. Let the world question, misunderstand, criticize, and yet remain standing. Because the moment you stop explaining, you will realize that you were never meant to be understood by everyone. You were meant to be true to yourself. But the world will not make this easy. The moment you withdraw from the game of explanations, people will test you. They will poke, they will prod, they will do everything they can to pull you back into the role they have assigned to you. Because people fear what they cannot control, and nothing is more uncontrollable than a person who does not seek approval. They will call you distant, arrogant, selfish. They will accuse you of changing, of being cold, of no longer caring. And in that moment, you will be tempted to explain, to soften, to reassure them that you are still the same person they once knew. But you must resist because you have changed, and that is not something to apologize for. Growth is not a betrayal, it is an evolution. And those who truly understand will not need an explanation. They will simply see you and know. The strongest people in history did not waste time justifying themselves. They did not pause their journey to argue with those who refused to see. They did not lower their voice so that others would feel comfortable. They walked forward with or without approval, knowing that their path was theirs alone. And in doing so, they became forces that could not be ignored. The lion does not ask permission to roar. The river does not explain why it carves through the land. The mountain does not justify its height. They exist, they move, they become. But here is the hardest truth to accept. Not everyone will come with you. Some will stay behind, bound to their own limitations, unwilling to see beyond their own perspective. Some will turn against you, not because you have wronged them, but because your growth forces them to confront their own stagnation. And some will try to pull you back, not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear that if you rise, you will leave them behind. And perhaps you will. But that is not your burden to carry, because the ones who are meant to walk with you will rise too. They will not ask you to explain yourself. They will not demand that you remain who you used to be. They will recognize your evolution, and they will celebrate it, because they too are evolving. There is an ancient story of a bird trapped in a cage, watching the sky, longing to fly but too afraid to leave. One day the door swings open, yet the bird does not move. It stays, not because it must, but because it has spent so long within the cage that it no longer believes in its own wings. The cage is open. Freedom is right there. But the bird hesitates, waiting for something. Permission, reassurance, certainty. And so it remains, trapped not by bars but by its own mind. This is how most people live. The cage is open. They are free to leave behind everything that weighs them down. The expectations, the need to be understood, the pressure to explain. But they hesitate. They wait. They tell themselves that one day they will be strong enough, certain enough, ready enough. And yet that day never comes, because freedom is not something you prepare for. It is something you take. So what are you still explaining? Who are you still waiting for approval from? What permission are you still seeking? If you knew with absolute certainty that you owed no one an explanation, how would you move differently? What choices would you make? What version of yourself would you finally step into? Because the truth is, you have nothing to prove. You never did. The only thing that was ever required of you was to be fully, unapologetically yourself. And the moment you embrace that, the moment you stop explaining, you will understand something most people never do. You were always free. You simply had to claim it. So let them misunderstand you. Let them question. Let them walk away if they must. It is not your responsibility to make them see. Your only responsibility is to continue forward, unwavering, untethered, unshaken. Because in the end, the ones who are meant to understand you will never need an explanation. And the ones who demand one were never meant to walk with you anyway. There is a shift that happens when you stop explaining yourself. A moment when you realize that your energy is too sacred to be spent convincing others of your worth, your choices, your path. It is the moment when you step fully into your power, when you recognize that true freedom is not found in seeking understanding, it is found in not needing it. Most people never reach this place. They are too consumed by the desire to be seen, to be validated, to be accepted by those who have already decided not to see them. They waste years trying to prove their value, trying to justify their growth, trying to gain approval from those who will never truly give it. And in doing so, they give away the one thing that is truly theirs, their peace. But the ones who rise, the ones who become untouchable, the ones who walk with an energy that cannot be ignored, they are the ones who no longer explain. They do not pause to convince. They do not lower themselves to be understood. They do not wait for permission to be exactly who they are. They simply are. Imagine a mountain standing tall against the sky. It does not justify its height. It does not apologize for the way it reaches upward, unshaken by the storms that rage around it. Some may admire it, some may fear it, some may try to conquer it. But the mountain does not concern itself with any of this. It simply stands. You must become like the mountain, but the world will resist. The moment you stop explaining yourself, the moment you stop defending your choices, the moment you walk forward without hesitation, people will notice. Some will admire you, others will resent you. Some will be inspired, others will be threatened. Let them. Their reaction is not your concern. Because here's the truth. Those who demand explanations from you are often the ones who do not even understand themselves. They question your path not because it is wrong, but because it forces them to confront their own fears, their own stagnation, their own unwillingness to grow. And when you engage with them, when you try to explain, when you waste your energy defending your transformation, you are not convincing them, you are feeding their doubt. But the moment you stop, the moment you no longer feel the need to prove anything, that is the moment you become untouchable. There is a story of a monk who was asked, "How do you remain so peaceful when people criticize you?" The monk smiled and said, "If someone offers me a gift and I do not accept it, to whom does the gift belong? The lesson is clear. What you do not accept cannot touch you. The words of others, the judgments, the misunderstandings, none of it can harm you unless you invite it in. But most people invite it in. They engage, they react, they defend. And in doing so, they give power to those who never deserved it. What if you stopped? What if, instead of explaining, you simply moved forward? What if, instead of justifying, you allowed your actions to speak? What if, instead of seeking to be understood, you became so certain in yourself that understanding was no longer necessary? Because here is the secret. Certainty does not need to be explained. Confidence does not require validation. Power is not found in how well you argue for your worth. It is found in how deeply you know it. Think of the fire that burns without apology. It does not explain why it consumes, why it transforms, why it rises. It simply does. Some will fear it, some will try to contain it, some will gather around it, drawn to its warmth. But none of this changes the fire. You must move through life in the same way. But understand this. When you stop explaining, when you stop justifying, when you no longer feel the need to convince, the world will test you. People will try to pull you back into old conversations, into old doubts, into old versions of yourself that no longer exist. Do not engage. Do not shrink. Do not lower yourself to be understood by those who have chosen to remain blind. Because your path is not about them. It never was. The ones who are meant to walk beside you will not ask you to explain yourself. They will recognize your energy, your presence, your certainty, and they will understand without words. And the ones who do not, they were never meant to walk with you in the first place. So let them misunderstand, let them question, let them doubt. It is not your burden to correct them. Your only task is to continue moving forward, unshaken, unapologetic, free. Because the moment you stop explaining yourself, you step into a kind of power that few will ever know. And once you taste that power, you will never return to the smallness of needing to be understood. There is a peace that comes when you stop explaining yourself, a calmness that settles into your soul when you finally understand that you are not responsible for how others perceive you. For too long, you have carried the weight of other people's opinions, bending yourself into shapes that were never yours to take, dimming your light so others would not feel uncomfortable. But the moment you stop seeking permission, the moment you stop justifying your existence, everything shifts. Most people never reach this place. They are trapped in a cycle of explaining, defending, and proving. They believe that if they just say the right words, if they just make others see their side, if they just explain well enough, they will finally be accepted. But the truth is, no amount of explaining will ever satisfy those who have already decided not to understand you. And so, the strongest people are not those who argue for their worth, but those who do not argue at all. They do not waste their breath on minds that are closed. They do not lower their energy to match those who refuse to rise. They walk forward unbothered, knowing that their path is not up for debate. Imagine standing in a vast desert, the wind howling around you. You could spend your time shouting into the storm, trying to control the chaos, trying to make the wind listen. Or you could simply keep walking, letting the storm pass, knowing that your energy is better spent moving forward than fighting against something that was never yours to control. This is the way of the unshakable mind. It does not fight battles that do not need to be fought. It does not waste energy on those who thrive on misunderstanding. It does not explain itself to those who are committed to seeing only what they want to see. But the world will not make this easy. The moment you stop explaining, the moment you stop reacting, people will push harder. They will try to provoke you, to pull you back into their games, to make you question yourself. Let them. Their desperation is proof that your silence has power. There is an old story of a warrior who stood before his enemies, calm and steady. They insulted him, mocked him, tried to break him with their words, but he did not respond. Finally, one of them shouted, "Why do you not fight back?" The warrior simply smiled and said, "Because your words are yours, not mine." This is what most people fail to understand. Not everything requires a reaction. Not every insult needs a defense. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Not every battle is yours to fight. The strongest minds do not explain. They embody. They move with such certainty that no words are needed. They carry themselves in a way that makes their presence undeniable. Think of a mountain. It does not explain why it stands. It does not justify its height. It does not seek approval for its existence. It simply is. And in its being, it commands respect. You must live like this. Let people misunderstand you. Let them talk. Let them create their own stories about you. It is not your burden to correct them. It is not your job to shrink yourself so they feel comfortable. Your only task is to continue, to rise, to walk forward without hesitation. Because the truth is, the moment you stop explaining yourself, you will feel a freedom unlike anything you have ever known. A freedom that says, I do not need to be understood to be at peace. A freedom that says, I do not need approval to move forward. A freedom that says, I am enough exactly as I am. There is a kind of power that most people will never understand. A presence that does not need to be loud. A certainty that does not require validation. It is the power of those who have stepped beyond the need to explain themselves. It is the quiet strength of those who no longer chase approval, who do not ask permission to exist as they are. And when you reach this place, something extraordinary happens. The world no longer controls you. Most people do not live in this kind of freedom. They are bound by invisible chains, shackled by the opinions of others, trapped in the exhausting cycle of trying to be understood. They hesitate before they speak, measuring their words carefully, fearing judgment, dreading rejection. They shrink themselves to fit into spaces that were never meant for them, apologizing for their presence, justifying their choices, seeking validation from people who will never truly see them. But what if you stopped? What if, instead of explaining, you simply lived? Instead of defending yourself, you moved forward? Instead of seeking to be understood, you became so undeniable that understanding was no longer necessary? Because here is the truth. Those who are meant to understand you will, and those who do not never mattered. Look at the people who command respect without demanding it. They do not argue. They do not beg to be seen. They do not waste their breath trying to convince those who refuse to listen. They walk into a room, and their presence is enough. They do not fill silence with unnecessary words. They do not dilute their truth to make others comfortable. They know who they are, and because they know, the world adjusts. Imagine the sun explaining why it rises. Imagine the wind justifying why it moves. Imagine a river pausing to defend its course. It is absurd, isn't it? And yet this is what most people do. They waste their time arguing for their own existence, seeking approval for their own path, hesitating at every step because they are afraid of being misunderstood. But here's the secret. You are not meant to be understood by everyone. The ones who are meant to walk with you will recognize you without a word. They will feel your energy, see your truth, and understand without explanation. And the ones who demand justification, they are not your concern. Let them question, let them doubt, let them form their own stories about you. It is not your responsibility to correct them. There is an ancient story of a monk who lived at the top of a mountain. People traveled for miles to ask him questions, seeking wisdom, but when they arrived, the monk would not speak. He simply sat silent, at peace, radiating an energy that answered more than words ever could. Some left frustrated, believing he had nothing to teach. Others stayed, realizing that wisdom is not in explanation. It is in presence. This is the power of those who no longer explain. Their silence speaks louder than words. Their stillness commands attention. Their certainty shakes the foundation of those who are still trapped in doubt. And that is why the world does not know how to handle them. Because most people are used to control. They are used to others bending, explaining, defending, seeking their approval. When you stop doing that, when you stand firm in who you are without apology, it unsettles them. It forces them to confront their own insecurities. It makes them question why they too do not move with such certainty. And in that questioning, they will do one of two things. They will either rise or they will resist. Some will be drawn to your strength. They will admire it, seek to learn from it, wish to walk beside it. Others will resent it. They will feel threatened, uncomfortable, exposed. They will try to bring you down to make you explain, to drag you back into the cycle of justification. But you must not engage, because the moment you do, The moment you try to defend yourself to those who have already decided not to understand, you lose. You step down from the place of power you have built. You lower yourself to meet them where they are, instead of rising to where you belong. A lion does not explain why it roars. A mountain does not justify its height. A storm does not apologize for its power. And you do not need to explain why you are no longer who you used to be. Let them talk. Let them assume. Let them question. It is not your burden to correct their misconceptions, because here is the truth. The ones who truly matter do not need an explanation. They will recognize your growth, feel your energy, and understand without a single word. And the ones who refuse to see, they were never meant to be part of your journey. The greatest strength is not in how well you argue, how much you defend, or how clearly you explain. The greatest strength is in how deeply you know. Because when you know, you do not need to convince. You do not need to prove. You do not need to seek approval. Plus, you simply exist. And in that existence, the right people will come. The right opportunities will align. The right paths will unfold. Not because you chase them, but because you became aligned with them. The world is filled with noise. Everyone is speaking, defending, justifying, explaining. But those who are truly wise know that real power is not in the noise.